Good evening and welcome to 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. This is day 188 and I'm continuing stories from 1001 Arabian Nights, specifically the story of the two Viziers that Jafar was telling the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, commander of the faithful, to try to win the freedom of his slave who had stolen the apple from the boy of the man who had set his wife in a container and thrown it into the river. All this trouble created by that slave. Now, remember there were two sons of a vizier, the vizier of the king, for the king of Egypt. And the eldest son's name was Shams al-Din Muhammad, and the younger Nur al-Din Ali. And Nur al-Din Ali was by far the most elegant and beautiful of the two, but both were incredibly talented and did the job as vizier quite well. They, when their father had died, became the two viziers of the king of Egypt and alternated 1 week on and 1 week off, working for the king. Now they'd gotten into an argument, remember, because they started talking about marrying their children to each other, children that they hadn't even had. They weren't even married, and yet they got into this rather significant argument about whose child was worth more and how much the dowry should be. And suddenly these two loving brothers had really become enemies and had said very cruel things to each other. Shams al-Din saying the most cruel things, and Nur al-Din refraining from speaking those words back and holding it in. Well, that night they only wanted to be apart from each other. They didn't want to be close to each other in any way, shape, or form. And when they got up, it had already been arranged that Shams al-Din would accompany the king to the pyramids in Egypt. And off they went that morning. Nur al-Din, when he awakened, he was still furious at his brother. He felt such anger for him. And he called one of his servants to him and asked that he ready his she-mule for a journey. And as his page was getting his steed ready, Nur al-Din went to his treasure chamber and he pulled out nothing but gold coins and placed them in a bag to carry with him. Now, he very carefully loaded everything that he needed, his provisions, food, a sleeping pad, and his gold, into saddlebags. And he turned to his servants and he let them know that he was going to be gone for a couple of days because he was feeling depressed and they should not in any way follow him. And he took off. And off he went with no intention of ever returning. And I'm going to read to you a verse that he recited to himself before he left. It goes like this. Travel and new friends will succeed the friends you lost, and toil for life's sweets do through toil come. To stay wins you no honor, nor from exile saves. Set out to roam the world and leave your home When water stands, it stagnates and turns foul and stinks, but tastes so sweet when it does flow and run. And if the sun stood in its orbit still, both Arabs and barbarians would tire of the sun. And if the full moon did not wax and wane, no watchful eyes would the moon's rising mark. If in the lair the lion stayed, in the bow the dart, neither would catch its prey or hit the mark. Deep in the mind, gold dust is merely dust, and in its native ground, fuel is aloe wood. Gold, when extracted, grows much in demand, and when exported, aloe fetches gold. So off he went. And he traveled all through the day until in the evening he came to a small town, the name of which I can't remember. And he had his she-mule stabled and fed, and he went into the inn that was there and fetched himself a room and a meal. And then the next day he continued on his journey. And as he was traveling along, he met a courier, someone who was transporting one message from one place to another along the way. And he joined with this courier and began to travel with him. And wherever the courier stopped, he stopped. And whenever he continued, he continued. And on he went with this courier for quite a ways until later that day, they came to the outskirts of Basra. Now, when they came to the outskirts of Basra, it turned out that the vizier to the king of Basra was approaching the city at the same time they were. And being on a faster steed, he overtook Nur al-Din. And when he passed him, he noticed how handsome this man was, how well-formed, and how he seemed to be quite dignified. And he pulled rein and came up next to him and asked him where he was going and what his story was. And Nur al-Din shared much of what was going on for him, that he had left his family because he had quarreled, and he had decided that he would, see all of the countries and all the lands of the world before he returned. And even if he died in the process, this is what would happen. He would be content with that. Well, as they talked back and forth, it seemed that the vizier grew quite fond of Nur al-Din and invited him to come to his home. And there he put him up for the night and took care of him as best he could, because the vizier felt a growing affection for this young man. Well, when they awakened in the morning, the vizier shared more with Nur al-Din than he could have ever imagined. And I will tell you that at the end of all that the vizier shared with him, Nur al-Din replied with, "So be it." We'll find out tomorrow what it was that he agreed to. Okay, thanks for joining. Have a good rest of your day or evening.